So do you want me to go ahead and do the introduction, Darlene? Okay, so good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. So I just want to remind everyone, as Nena said, this meeting is being recorded. So I think everybody knows me. I'm Melanie Cavalier. I'm the Chief of Innovative Care Delivery at the Maryland Healthcare Commission. I just want to quickly cover some administrative items. We sent an email with the technical contact information for the MHCC team. So please contact Anena if you have any problems with your audio or video, or you get logged out and you need to log back in. So as a courtesy to others, we ask you to remain on mute when you're not speaking to reduce the background noise. Staff may mute you if there's noise coming from your line, but you can always unmute yourself. We ask that you hold questions to the end of the presentation. At the conclusion, you can raise your hand or enter your question into the chat box. The meeting facilitator will sequence speakers and may also call on people to ensure we have a range of perspectives. If the speaker is not able to answer your question during the meeting, they'll respond via email after the meeting. So just a reminder, this is still open to new practices. So if you know someone who's interested and thinks that they can benefit from this program, please let the MedKai team know and we can get them an application. So we'll now begin the training module 4, making the business case for practice transformation. This is one of my favorite modules because the question that I get a lot is, people understand from the clinical perspective why they should do these programs, but they say, as a business, why does it make sense for me as a business to do this? So I think there's some really good things in this module. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Darlene to go through the training.
Good morning, everybody. So this is my favorite training because this is my passion, revenue cycle. And so this talks a lot about revenue cycle and expenses and margins and those kind of things. And this is really where it comes down to the nitty-gritty and making your practice sustainable. And that's what's really important as well. Clinical is very important, but having the revenue to make your practice sustainable is what helps clinical to do even better. Next slide, please. So again, we have the disclaimer, and we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about, in this module, we're going to talk about, again, sustainable business operations to make your organization successful. But unfortunately, a lot of practices think that that's just restricted to the finance staff, just the people who are doing billing and coding, but it's not. In small practices, it might just be the practice manager, but in large practices, it might be an isolated department. But really, sustainable business operations and finance is the responsibility of every member of your staff. Every member of your staff needs to be educated in finance. They need to be educated in revenue cycle and how what they do affects revenue cycle. The check-in person, they affect revenue cycle if they're not collecting co-pays, if they're not getting the correct insurance information. Everything they do affects finance. So everyone should be involved in it, and everyone should be, everything should be transparent. So let's go to the next slide. There are several TCPI change concepts that are related to ensuring that positive business case and sustainable operation. And in this module, we'll explore about 7 change concepts that address the business case. And there's also the change package to find additional resources. What I have done in this presentation is taken the training module and the change concepts and combined it into one, because these are very vital concepts that we need to go through in order to make sure that your practice has sustainable revenue. Next slide, please. So let's first talk about the business case in itself. Next slide. So in the change package, there are a number of concepts. We'll talk about these a little bit, and then we'll go into more detail. So one is maximizing the benefit of participation in alternative and performance payment arrangements. That's going to increase revenue. The next one is managing the revenue cycle, including billing and collection processes. I know that many small practices use a billing company, and that's fine. But with billing companies, if you are complacent about your billing, the billing company will be complacent. If you make them accountable, if you ask lots of questions, if you are looking at what they're doing, they will do a better job. A long time ago, a provider said to me, my father always said, someone has to mind the store. And so that's what I say to you. Someone has to mind the store. So just because you have a billing company and just because they're doing the billing does not mean that you don't have to mind the store. Also, recognize and reward innovations and contributions to organizational goals. So if you are looking at your AR days and you are looking at, let's try very hard to get our AR days down 10%, and you make that goal, and it's because everybody worked together, reward that. Reward that. Share your financial data transparently with the staff and help them understand how the organizational finances are working, how business practices, how tools are working. Another one, document the organization's business case at multiple levels and to multiple stakeholders. Streamline your workflows so you can increase the value of all the steps and eliminate waste whenever possible. We'll talk about these in a minute. Next slide. So the business case of any organization appears simple on paper. It's the function of revenue and funding received and expenses incurred. The difference between revenue coming in and expenses going out contributes to something called the margin, which provides for sustainability and allows investment in innovation or improvement. The more a practice can either increase revenue or reduce costs in various areas, the greater the margin available to support those resources. Next one, next slide. So again, your margin equals revenue minus expenses. So the revenue minus expenses equals the margin. The margin is what allows you to do extra things to help the business improve. Next slide. So to ensure that sustainability, the practice needs to understand its current business case. So like any journey, it's difficult to develop a pathway unless you know your starting point. Ultimately, a practice needs to understand its impact on the total cost of care of its patients. So when you understand the total cost of care, it's the system level business case that underpins many alternative payment models. So for practices without their access to payer costs, you have to suggest you look internally first. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about strategic use of practice revenue. So first, consider that non-traditional revenue. So maximize your benefit by participating in the alternative and the performance payment arrangement. So engage in direct contracting with your payer. I have been in many practices over the years where they haven't looked at their contract, nor have they negotiated their contract in 10 years. So think about that. Think about direct contacting with the client. Think about making sure of that. And also think about making sure that those contracts you have, that the payers are paying you what they said they were going to pay. Because a lot of times you get put into the system and maybe somebody pushes the wrong button and you're being paid a different contract. So you want to make sure that you're minding that store again. Think about accepting capitated primary care plans for patients with those really high deductible. Think about ancillary services. What kind of ancillary services? What am I talking about? So maybe a dermatology practice might start selling a skincare line. Maybe an ophthalmologist might start doing contact. Those kind of things. Ancillary services, different kinds of services. Consider setting up a drug discount program if it's eligible. That's mostly for very large practices. Apply for grants as permitted. There is a practice that I'm working in with this program, and they have applied for grants to get extra money to hire another staff member to help them out. They're a small practice. It's a woman-owned practice, and they are looking at getting that additional money to help get new revenue by getting more staff. Evaluate whether or not it's good for you to do phone care and telehealth. There's a number of practices that I have here that are almost 100% telehealth because they are in rural areas and they need to be telehealth because patients can't travel far to go to them. You might want to consider hiring a consultant to assist you with the transformation efforts to get those things started. Develop a plan so you can expand your practice capacity and drive more patient volume and growth. Consider some kind of retail clinics. Let's consider the next one.
Darlene, you went out a little bit and I couldn't hear what you said. Did you say next slide?
Yes, please.
Your volume went out just a little bit.
Did it? Okay, I'm sorry. Next one is business accuracy. So effectively manage your revenue cycle, just as I was talking about before, including billing and collection processes. Make sure someone's minding that score. Make sure you're maximizing claims rejections from all sources. Make sure that you are taking care of those claims rejections, but not only taking care of them, but preventing them from happening the next time. Because if you have to appeal a claim, it costs you money. You want to get the claim paid on the first pass through. So whatever you can do to get that done. So if you have a billing company and you're looking at the billing company and you're seeing that this particular type of claim is always rejecting, then look at it with the billing company and say, what can we do to prevent this from rejecting all the time? Let's see what we can do. When it says review and adjust the charge master. So this means that you're going to look at what I was speaking about before, making sure that the payer is paying you your contracted rates. The billing companies can put those contracts into their system and they can look at them and make sure that you are being paid what the payer says you are supposed to be paid. And look at billing versus collection and make sure that all the payments are accurate. Maximize your point of service collection. Maximize that. Train your front desk staff to collect co-pays, to collect deductibles, to collect outstanding balances, and teach them why. If they don't know why, they don't always think about it. They'll say, oh, we'll just bill you for the copay. What they don't realize is that if it's a $15 copay and you have to send a bill for that copay, it costs $5 to send a statement. So in fact, You're not collecting a $15 copay. You're now collecting a $10 copay. So make sure your staff not only knows that they need to collect those copays, but why it's important to collect them at the front instead of billing at the back, because of the cost that it costs to do that. And so it's really important to make sure that your staff understands the ramifications of what they're doing. Collecting those past due balances. It's easier to collect it when the patient's right there. You have their credit card, you can get that information. Sending bills, patients tend to take those bills and say, it's a doctor's office, I'll pay my Verizon bill first. And if I have any money left over, I'll do that. But when they're facing you, you're going to pay your bill. Provide data and feedback about collection rates and rejection. Let your staff know. We've had a number of rejections because the information was not collected correctly. And this is why it costs us money when we have to go back and call the patient and resend the claim and do those types of things. So letting the front staff know this is why it's so important, and your job in collecting this information is vital to our practice. Makes them more loyal, makes them more accountable, makes them feel like, oh, I realize what this is. Perform your periodic coding results. Make sure you're looking, if you're having coding rejections, make sure someone is looking at why that's happening, and then educate your clinicians on that so that they know, oh, I've been using that wrong code, I need to do that. Let them know, let the providers know, okay, this is the reason why we're having this problem. If you can, assist families with Medicaid enrollment, even if you have a health department phone number, letting patients, if you're having a lot of trouble with this, here's where you go to get Medicaid. Appeal every denial. Don't say, oh, they denied it, I'll just write it off. Don't do that. Appeal those denials and find out why they're denying and try to prevent those denials. Look at a risk management protocol. Hold bills for patients with bad outcomes. Think about that with your risk management. Use sliding fee schedules based on patients' ability to pay. And right size the revenue staff. Never say, oh, I'm gonna just only have one person doing revenue cycle. If in fact, you can hire another person and make a difference in your revenue cycle. We used to have at one of our practices, we used to have a staff member who came in late, and she would stay later. In the last hour that she was there, that's all she did was make calls to patients with past due balances and try to collect it. And she got a bonus based on what she did. Next slide. So you want to ensure the completeness of your billing. Make sure you're including your chronic care management, palliative care, advanced directives planning. Use your dashboard and metrics to look at the quality improvement opportunity. Next slide. And next, we're going to talk about the steps for sustainability. Expense and revenue. So on the expense side, there are often opportunities to streamline workflows, drive efficiency, reduce waste, using some lean approaches and tools like process mapping. Eliminating process steps can increase time for activities that add more value to patients as well as to staff. So there are two revenue ideas from the change package, including making sure the organization can collect as much revenue as possible from its existing contracts. This means managing the revenue cycle through things like timely and accurate coding, collection of codes, following up on outstanding receivables, It also means looking at any performance-based contracts and working with all staff to ensure effective management of the metrics that are driving control, like cancer screening rate, hypertension control, or ED utilization. Next slide, please. So a common thread in both early revenue and expense opportunities is the reliance on all the staff at all levels to make it work. This means all members of the staff need to understand the big picture, as I've been saying, where they fit in and where they can make a difference. Transparency of this information is essential, though it may require some portion of skill building to make it meaningful. So getting everyone involved in working on sustainable business operations means recognition and reward of that when they offer ideas that add value. Sustainable business operations are critical. All the pieces need to fit together with all of the staff playing a role in it. Next slide. So workforce vitality and joy in work. Having your staff feel good about what they do. That's key. And rewarding them for helping your practice to grow, for helping your practice to be sustainable. That's what's really important. Having a staff member say, I love my job. I love to come to work because I help patients and I help the day. Let's do that. We want to work with them. Next slide. So reward and recognize. So you're going to recognize and reward innovation and contribution to those organizational goals. You're going to celebrate suggestions for improvement and solution ideas that are developed by the staff. So recognize them at a staff meeting. Say, Jane has come up with a really good idea. I want to let everyone know about this idea. I want everyone's feedback on the idea. Let's look at negatives and positives. But we're really excited that Jane came up with this idea. And we wanted to make sure everyone know that she thought of this idea to help our practice do it every day. Have a context. Give staff time for innovation. Give them time to think about things. Have a creativity session when you do your staff meeting. I know that you're all burdened with a lot of work to do, but it's important. And sometimes that idea can give you more time to do other things. So train your staff in thinking about design. Include expectations about participation in quality performance review. Use incentive and rewards and tie compensation to team, departmental, and organizational goals. In my last a job as director of revenue cycle at St. Joseph's, we put together 10 metrics that we would like our staff to meet. And those 10 metrics, if they went over it, depending on the percentage that they went over in those metrics, made sure that they got a bonus. And the bonus was based on those metrics. And it helped us to have a better bonus, to increase what we got. Next slide. So now we're getting capability to analyze and document that. Let's go to the next slide. So develop financial acumen. So share that data with your staff and your providers and develop their capabilities in understanding the organization's finance and using business practices and tools. So conduct business fundamental training, maybe like a lunch and learn session. Treat them to lunch and teach them about business. Teach them about it costs this much money to train. It costs this much money to send the statement. And every time you do that, it costs more money. Make sure budget preparation occurs at the level the costs are incurred. Share the financial implications of care decisions. Share prices that are charged for services. Dedicated meetings to explaining the practices financial statement. Next slide. So you're going to document the organization's business case at multiple levels to multiple stakeholders. So you're going to analyze those internal costs of care by service and by population characteristics. Use external benchmarks to compare internal costs and revenue metrics, like the cost per visit or the revenue per provider for full-time equivalent, and determine profitability by site and by service. So maybe you have two offices. Which office is more profitable? Which service is more profitable? Next slide, please. And the efficiency of operation. This is critical. You don't need to waste any money. Next slide. To streamline your work and increase the value of all staff. So train staff in lean approaches and the concept of value. Consider hiring or training an internal expert in process improvement. Use those lean principles across the organization, such as defining waste and identifying value for the future eyes. Use process mapping to document workflows and identify value added and non-value steps. And convene regularly to discuss and improve workflows to optimize the use of the EHR. So one of the things that we did in our practice, one of my practices was, we did a lot of process mapping. So we decided to do the how a claim was done from the beginning to the end. So we started with the provider. This was anesthesia. So the provider's in the OR. The provider is taking care of the anesthesia record. They're taking care of that. Then they're holding up the record, putting it in the pocket. Then they go into the room, into the lounge, and they put it in these different bins. And then someone comes in and takes them out of the bin. They unfold them. They check them for completeness. And then they fold them back up and they send them over to the bin. And then the billing office takes them and opens them up, puts them in date order, puts them in patient order, checks to make sure that they're all there, and then folds them up again and gives them out to the billers. And so we went through that whole process. We had a person that one of the middlemen that was getting ready to retire. And so we redesigned that whole process and eliminated that staff member because there was multiple areas of duplication. Now, if she hadn't been retired, we would have used her in a different part of the office and increased some other area that we needed her, but she happened to be retiring, so we just eliminated. So look at those processes and make sure that everything that you're doing, you're not duplicating things, that you're not redoing those. And maybe you can take a staff member who is doing one thing that's duplicated and put them in a different area. Maybe they could make some phone calls to patients who claims have rejected and they needed information. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. Next slide, please. And eliminate waste. Just-in-time inventory approaches. Standardizing the room setup and supplies. So if you have 3 rooms and you do the same procedure in all 3 rooms, we're going to make sure that the room setup is exactly the same in each room so that there's no waste of time for the provider or the medical assistant for looking for where things are, because things should be in the same exact place so that if you go in any of those rooms, you can find exactly what you need exactly on time. Saves time. That's wasteful too. Wasting time is just as wasteful as wasting money and wasting inventory. So you want to make sure you do that. Optimizing your staff on a daily basis. So assuring minimal downtime of staff and space. Centralize your stock and ordering, especially if you have multi-sites. Establish pull-down principles. Put supplies and kits when frequently needed together. So if you have something, a suture removal kit, if you know you're going to need tape, gauze, scissors, those kind of things for a specific type of procedure, a specific type of thing. Put it in a kit so that you don't have to go from this drawer to that drawer to this drawer to that drawer. Make sure you're using spaghetti diagrams to track the movement through the practice. Is the provider or is the patient, are we going from one room here and then we're going to another room and then we're going back to a room, we're going back to a room. Waste of time, I'll give you an example. I had a GI appointment. I went for that appointment. I scheduled my routine colonoscopy. In that appointment, I gave them all my information. They gave me information. They told me I need to go to the surgery center. So I get to the colonoscopy center. When I get there, they give me a packet of about 10 pieces of paper to fill out. Well, first of all, when you go, they tell you to bring minimal stuff. So I didn't bring a lot of stuff, but I had to remember all of my past surgical history, my medications, my this, my that, and all of that. If they had either sent that form to me or given that form to me at the GI office, I could have had that all filled out. And when I got there, I could have turned it in, or I could have faxed it to them and they could have put it all in their system and had it ready before I got in. And that way I wouldn't have had to sit there and filled out all those forms. So those are things that can make things more efficient for not only the patient, but for the practice. Cross-train the staff so that if you have someone that is out, someone else can jump in. Standardize the workflow across care teams and sites where possible. Make sure you're eliminating that waste. One of the wasteful things, when I first went into a practice, this was a different practice years ago, I got in that practice, they hadn't had an office manager for 4 to 5 months. And they had stacks of paper in the office manager's office that were as tall as me. Now, granted, I'm only 5 feet tall, so I'm not that tall, but 5 feet tall paper that's surrounding the perimeter that has never been looked at is wasteful. It's wasteful. I went into the computer room. There were upgrades sitting there that had never been done. There were pieces of equipment in there that were not working or had been replaced, and they just left the old pieces there. I went into the accounts payable and found out that they were still paying for service policies on pieces of equipment that weren't even ever in the office. They were paying for the chairs. They were renting the chairs because they rented them because in case one broke, they got another one for free. And they had been renting those chairs for 10 years and they only replaced one. So wasteful money, wasteful. So think about all of those things when you're doing that, because not only is working with revenue a problem, working with waste is a problem. Next slide. So this is the end of the presentation of that. I'd like to bring up the spotlight, and you were sent that spotlight yesterday afternoon about a practice that worked with revenue as well. I'm sorry, my screen looks kind of funny. I have a lot of sun down. Okay. So this is a strategic final planning, and it's about a practice that was privately owned with 9 providers. They had been around for 60 years and they took care of tons of patients. And they wanted to remain solvent and they wanted to remain a privately owned practice. But when they looked at everything that was going on, they feared that they would not be able to continue to do that. They were very concerned about whether they could do that. And then can you scroll up a bit?
This is the top, you mean down?
Scroll down, I'm sorry. So they had a challenge. They were they were in sort of like a holding pattern, and they were indebted to a contract, a terrible contract, and it prevented them from pursuing other opportunities, and they wanted to figure out what they needed to do. So they hired a new leader, a new practice administrator, and that person was charged with figuring out how to take care of that. And so they wanted the administrator to look at their infrastructure. They wanted to look at the roles of the practice stakeholders. They wanted to look at physician and staff engagement. They wanted to look at communication barriers with healthcare and insurance pay. And they wanted to create an organizational trust. Scroll down a little bit more. So they looked at changes that they wanted to make. And they began researching different opportunities for value-based payments. And they looked at the strategic use of their revenue. So they used spreadsheets, they analyzed the income, they analyzed their expenses, they analyzed the percentage of revenue that was fee for service, and also quality with incentives. And so they were looking at maybe a 3-year forecast of what they could do. And then they scroll a little more for me. So they looked at changing some things. They wanted to change things. They wanted the practice as a community partner. They wanted to use strategic practice revenue. They wanted to create workforce vitality and joy. Scroll up a little bit, scroll down a little bit more. So they looked at quality performance, and that became a priority. And they engaged their entire staff in this process. And they wanted them to help them, and they wanted them to stay competitive. And they explained to them the benefits of them staying as a privately owned practice rather than joining a big group. A little bit more, and then I think we can go down to the bottom. So in the outcome, they were able to remain independent. And during that year, they ended positive 5.3% when they had predicted a loss of 7.6%. They generated $6 million in revenue. 252,000 of that was attributed to advanced payment models. That's where it came. And not advanced payment models, alternative payment model. And that's where they learned that you can have a sustainable practice, but you have to work through that. So now I'm going to open up the floor. If anyone wants to have a conversation or wants to talk about anything, we can certainly go over that or contribute something to that. Or what did you think of this? I know this is my passion, so I love to talk about revenues. Nobody?
Hey, Darlene, it's Rebecca. I'll just say, I think it's given Andrea and I a lot to think about, a lot of different ideas to float around and go over.
Yes, and I thought it was great yesterday. I'm gonna say this, Melanie, this is something that you might want to hear. So Andrea and I were having a conversation yesterday, and Andrea and Rebecca are both MDVIP providers, but they are in the same office, but 2 separate practices. But Andrea said, if we were talking about patient-family engagement, she said, I wonder if Rebecca and I could work on patient-family engagement together and collaborate together since we're in the same office and create one for both of our offices. And I thought that was such a great idea and a great innovative way for the 2 of them, separate practices in the same office, to be able to work collaboratively together. Do you think that was a great idea?
Yeah, I think that's definitely some outside of the box creative thinking. Do they have a central person who answered, like the front desk person who also manages appointments, or are they completely separate?
We have the ability, we have 4 front desk staff people generally, and we cross cover for each practice. So we know whose phone line is ringing in, and we're able to make appointments for each doctor as necessary, take patient cases for each doctor as necessary. So behind the scenes, we are 2 separate practices, but realistically, we try to give the impression that we are just one cohesive big family.
Yeah, so a lot of practices actually operate that way. They have a shared space and shared admin, but they're actually 2 separate business entities that are in a shared space. And the reason I ask that is because sometimes the things patients will bring up are things related to making appointments, following up on appointments, being able to get in touch with their provider. Those are some pretty common things that patients will mention. And that's why I ask if you guys had that central space, but it can be a very efficient arrangement, and it can really work for people. And again, you get the benefits, of if you want to be those separate businesses, but then you also have that shared staff that you can cut, like you said, cross cover for each other. If somebody's on vacation, if somebody's not feeling well, just if one practice is more overwhelmed. So I absolutely think that's a great idea to do your patient and family engagement together.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, so, Trish, did you have anything to add? You're on
I
mute.
do have a quick question in regards to like the revenue and fee costs or fee charges that the doctor
Yes.
charges. Is there a general place that we could look at to update our fee schedule? Like, because I'm not sure, for instance, if we're charging the current fees for an office visit or, vaccines, I know are standard, but I just want to make sure that, like, for instance, Dr. Anders' fee schedule is up to the current market, so to speak.
One of the things, I don't know, does Athena, does MDVIP, do they do your contract negotiations?
Um,
I don't know. Do you know, Andrea?
I don't think, what contract negotiations with the
Sure.
insurances? I don't know, because when we became MDVIP, we did our own contracts. I'm not sure. I think it changed when Dr. Hunter came on and MDVIP helped Dr. Hunter.
Right. They did our credentialing, but I don't know I don't know how negotiating the fees.
So the first thing you need to ask is meet with your rep for MDVIP and ask them who negotiates contracts.
Okay.
You see those contracts. And then to look at those contracts, I imagine, I'm just thinking this, I don't know what you think, Melanie, but I would think VIP does negotiate those contracts.
I would think so.
I would think that they do. And then make sure that Athena has those contracts loaded into the billing system. So your billing rep, you might want to talk to, maybe the 2 of you could meet and talk to them about contracts and who negotiates and are those contracts loaded into the system. And once you find that out, then you can work towards it. Because, I've been in practices where the contracts were loaded and they hadn't negotiated them for a long time. And say, I don't know, just off the top of my head, an office visit, a 99213 was paying $150, but they were only charging 100. Well, if you only charge 100, that's all you get paid. So you want to make sure that you're charging more than what the contract is, so that you make sure that you're getting your maximum reimbursement.
Right. That's exactly my point. I just want to.
And usually the rule of thumb in my revenue cycle world is that you charge 200% of what Medicare. If Medicare pays $110, you're gonna charge $220. Because that way you can kind of monitor everything. Because nobody's gonna pay that 200% of Medicare, but you want to make sure that you have that in there so that you make sure you're maximizing your revenue. That's kind of a rule of thumb. But I think it would do you a lot of good for the two of you to meet with your billing rep and start that conversation. That's what I was talking about when I was saying minding the store.
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes, very important to do. Trish, I saw you come off and then we got into a conversation. I'm so sorry we overrode.
No, no, it's okay. Oh, that was helpful. I just know that a lot of this is, I've know a lot of this already from where I had practiced before, but I think it's really good for Dr. Gandhi to hear all of this because.
So so he's gonna be on Monday and then he's gonna check to make sure that he's signed up. If she tells me he's not, I'll send you a quick email and let you know to get on board with that, okay?
Yeah, because we have to emphasize to him how important it is to get help with this billing because this is an area that he's lacking in because the person that was in billing had quit and that was not my my specialty. So it's
Yes, so it's and that's why I'm so passionate about this because I feel like it's critical to sustaining the practice. Clinical is important.
absolutely.
Downside.
It's your key because if you don't have your pricing and your billing and that's your revenue and he doesn't understand how important it is. So.
All right, so Anene is gonna put in the chat, she's gonna put the attestation for today's training. If the three of you could do that. Trish, if you do it, then Dr. Gandhi won't have to do it on Monday.
So where do I do? Because he usually does all of that.
So it's the attestation, it's a
Okay.
list to come up in the chat.
Okay.
I just want to give a special thank you to everyone for attending today and for continuing through this program. We greatly appreciate any feedback that you have for us. We want this to be as useful as possible for practices. So, let Darlene or Medkai or myself know if you have any comments or suggestions. And thank you again for all that you're doing to improve your practice.
So once you have done the attestation, make sure when you do the attestation that when you hit submit, you should get a thank you. If you haven't gotten a thank you, it means you haven't completed the attestation. And once you've finished it, then you can drop off the call. And Anene said that Dr. Gandhi is registered for Monday, Trish.
Okay, great.